This is Fusion Capitalism, a clean energy vision for conservatives. Brought to you by industry leader and company CEO, Steve Malink. Here's Steve.
Welcome back to the conclusion of my conversation with Mark Reynolds, the Executive Director at Citizens Climate Lobby. Mark, elections are supposed to have consequences, and now that Biden has been elected, do you see any movement above and beyond what you were seeing before Election Day?
So I think so, because what we see coming out of this election is we are going to have a divided Congress. And so you can't do something that only appeals to Democrats. Even if the Democrats pick up those 2 seats in Georgia, there are some unreliable Democrats to vote on the price of carbon. So what this puts us in the position of, I think, coming to terms with the reality that if we want a successful program, it has to have something that can appeal to both sides of the aisles. So obviously we had an anti-climate action president for the last 4 years. That was unfortunate. We have a very pro-climate change president. Janet Yellen was one of the people who signed on to that economist statement. Every former federal living chair of the Fed signed on to that statement, 27 Nobel laureates. And so now you have Janet Yellen, who's for that policy. And certainly John Kerry understands the importance of price. So I think we're in a position where there's going to be a bit of a reality check of we've got to offer a solution that has good options for both sides of the aisle, and this does.
It seems that many, if not most, Republicans recoil at the thought of any Green New Deal being passed into law. And that's certainly not Biden's climate agenda per se, but it seems that the Green New Deal has more of a brand behind it or something. You know, what would you say is the brand behind Biden's climate agenda, other than the cost, which I understand will be $2 trillion? How would you summarize in a catchphrase what the Biden climate agenda is?
Ambitious. The thing that I think the Green New Deal did well was it said, we've got to be really ambitious with something. This is a big problem. It's going to take a while to turn it around. And so we need a broad ambition. It certainly had some political issues. But I think what we heard from Biden on the campaign, what we're hearing from the people that he's surrounding himself with is this is going to be a big priority and he's going to deal with it. And I think that the details will shake out quickly. I don't think he's going to wait. And so I think we'll see something broad and ambitious.
And will that be broad and ambitious in the way that it is somehow linked to a infrastructure bill kind of a thing? Will it be about going to a smart national grid, you know, a network of charging stations across the country and maybe battery storage and those kind of things?
I think all of those could be part of it. You know, the other tricky thing with, sometimes we get pushback from people who say, I don't really believe in market mechanisms and the only way you can deal with this is through a regulatory approach. We have a 6-3 Supreme Court now where if you're pushing regulations, a lot of Republican governors were very successful in challenging the Clean Power Plan, which was not really heavy-handed regulation. But nevertheless, because it was regulatory in nature, they were very successful in fighting in the courts. I think you've got to put some things out there that can be done and that can't be dismantled in the courts.
Okay. So going back to a carbon tax, I've heard people say, let's put a price on carbon. Let's put a fee on carbon. Is there much thought, in your opinion, on the exact wording of any bill? Are people trying to purposely avoid the word tax and be a little more politically correct, maybe by calling it a price on carbon or a fee or something like that?
It's interesting. We were, former Secretary of State Schultz is a member of our advisory board. And one of the times we were meeting with him, he said, taxes are the things that grow government. Given what your proposal says is you put a fee on fuels and then you return every single dollar to households, it doesn't qualify as a tax because it doesn't grow government. And there certainly is a lot of people who have a pretty strong knee-jerk reaction to anything that says it says tax. So, it is important how you message it. Representative
Mhm.
Deutsch, who was the author of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, that's the title he created. It says Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. So it focuses on what the market is supposed to do, which is to give the proper incentive. There's a lot of people who say we're going to create a whole bunch of new technologies that's going to solve the problem. The question is there sufficient pressure in the market to innovate at the level that we need? And the answer is no, there's not. And that's why you put a fee on carbon is you send a price signal that says to people, Elon Musk is not going to be the only gazillionaire off of battery storage technology. Lots of people are, because a signal has been sent of the direction that the market's going. And so I think that's really the important thing is you send that signal so that people who are going to be building the future of energy, you talked about a smart grid, know that they're going to make a ton of money on it. Fine with me. It's not something that I care about, but fine with me if a bunch of people become gazillionaires transitioning our economy over to a clean economy.
Mhm. So if the U.S. does put a price on carbon, will that be enough to solve this global climate problem that we have? Will other countries, and maybe especially China and India, have to follow suit for this to be an effective strategy?
Yeah, it will. I mean, and let's be crystal clear. A price is probably the most important piece, but there's a lot of other things that need to happen. The IPCC report, most recent version, told us it's not going to be enough just to reduce emissions, but we need to figure out how to start extracting some CO2 out of the atmosphere. The third piece of our policy proposal is actually a border carbon adjustment to deal with exactly what you just said. What the border carbon adjustment says, if other countries don't have an equivalent fee, then you attach a fee when their goods come in and their goods become not as competitive. That's a really big part of the program is the border carbon adjustment says to India, to Russia, if you want to continue exporting things here, we're happy to collect your money. It would probably be better for you to assess your own fee so you can collect it yourself. So that's an actually crucial piece also. And I think that it's also gives the U.S. a chance to establish itself as a leader on the most important issue we face. But that the border carbon adjustment, which we've talked to lots of people who are WTO experts, say that it will hold up to WTO scrutiny, where you can put a fee on at the border. If other countries don't have an equivalent fee, you can add that cost to any imports from that country.
Do no other countries have this thing called a price on carbon? I often hear like Germany's price of gasoline or diesel is many times more than our price. Is that because they've in effect put a price on carbon, or is it for other reasons?
Well, so Canada has a system that's pretty close to what we're talking about right now. The European Union has a cap and trade program. So that's another price. There are over 30 prices around the world where there are countries that are already pricing carbon in different ways. The two most traditional is either just a straightforward tax or fee or a cap and trade program. Either of those are pricing mechanisms. The state of California, where I live, which is I think now the fifth biggest economy in the world, has a cap and trade program. So there's a lot more pricing of carbon around the world than most people are aware of. So the people who say, well, if we do something, we're going alone. No, we're not. There's a lot of people already doing it. In fact, the European Union is going to start enforcing their border adjustment next year. And I'm hoping that sends a strong signal to American manufacturers that they want to start putting a lot of additional pressure on Congress because they don't want to pay that fee to the European Union.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's talk about the Paris Climate Agreement. Obviously, President Biden will plan to rejoin it, probably even on the first day of his administration. But do you envision any qualifications to us rejoining that to the degree there's any new concerns about it, or will that be addressed maybe in the next session, I think, which will be in 2022?
I would hope so, and I would hope that stronger commitments are made. I mean, it was a remarkable thing that many countries signed on and said, yes, we need to do this, but there were no enforcement mechanisms. But I love Christine Figueres, who was really central to all that getting done. She talked about being a stubborn optimist. That is, hard as those kinds of things are, you just hang in there. But hopefully, what would happen? I think the next meeting is 2021 in Scotland. that there would be stronger commitments made, and that hopefully, certainly from our country's perspective, that we would make much stronger commitments than the original agreement. The original agreement, it is amazing to get that many countries to agree that we all need to do something. But then it's also tricky to say how powerful it is when there's really no enforcement mechanisms.
To address your concern that with every administration, there might be different shifts in momentum or whatever, how important do you think it is that we confirm this agreement into an actual bona fide treaty rather than a president unilaterally being able to say, we've signed on to this agreement?
Yeah, that would be great, wouldn't it? We would all want that to happen.
So shifting over to the upcoming Senate races in Georgia, how important is that in your estimation on any climate action going forward?
So because we've always taken the approach that we needed it from both sides of the aisle, I think it's a little bit easier if the Democrats win those two seats, just because getting McConnell to agree to put something on the floor of the Senate is complicated. In terms of rounding up enough votes, either way, we knew we were going to need votes from both sides of the aisle. We've, as an organization, generally stayed out of elections and decided that we would work with whoever's elected. That being said, a lot of our volunteers spent a ton of time in this last election cycle supporting the Environmental Voter Project, trying to make sure people who had the concern for climate change, that those people were actually going to go to the polls and vote.
And so will your strategy in 2021 be the same regardless of who would have been president, or does the calculus change?
If Trump had won re-election, then we would have been forced to significantly reevaluate, because we don't want to win arguments. We want to reduce emissions. And if Trump had been reelected, I think you would have a pretty clear signal that there was not going to be action on a federal basis. And we would have been forced to do a lot more work in the states and municipalities. But Biden and his team seem very serious about doing something on a federal basis. So that gives us some hope and some optimism that we can get something done and that we can get support from both sides of the aisle.
Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation, Mark. I guess if there are any parting words, what would they be to someone maybe that you would not have connected with through your lobby who are now listening to this program? What do they need to know as final words of wisdom?
Well, I mean, the main thing I want you to know is that we are an organization that is really out to prove that democracy can work, and that it's possible to dignify the political process. It's possible to work with people you disagree with and do it in a respectful way. I think that more and more people and organizations hope that's the case, and we're certainly trying to demonstrate that that can be done.
Very powerful. Thank you, Mark. It's been a very enlightening conversation, and I wish you the best of luck in the new year.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'd love to come back sometime.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks for listening to Fusion Capitalism. To find out more about Steve Malink and his book, go to fusioncapitalism.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.